Warning, if depictions of gruesome demonic imagery offend you, do not watch. If anything involving art inspired by real-world religious cultures makes you feel uncomfortable, do not watch. And finally, if the glorification of extremely violent Trench Crusade warfare excites and inspires you to be the deviant you feel you are deep down inside, then this video is for you. Mini Wargamer Dave here from miniwargaming.com, and in this video, I present all the lore from the 8 units I've found on my favorite Trench Crusade faction, the Court of the Seven Headed Serpent. I've compiled it from the lore primer I downloaded for free on the Trench Crusade website, which you can do as well. I'll dive into the cultural significance and possible interpretations of where some of these mind-bending demons get their inspiration. If you've 3D printed some of your own Trench Crusade minis, consider entering them into the painting competition hosted on Canvas. Not only is this a great way of participating in a fast-growing community, it's a great opportunity to support the creators of the game itself. So without further ado, let's enter the Court of the Seven Headed Serpent. Jutting from eternally belching plumes of stinking, corrosive smoke is the Iron City of Dis, and atop its shrieking black keep is the Infernal War Council. There sit 7 of the greatest, most wicked, and most cunning of archdevils, each representing one of the 7 mortal sins made manifest. They are the rulers of the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, which oversees Hell's war against creation on Earth. Each is known as one of the heads of the serpent, and ultimately it is their commands that dictate all the military forces of the Great War in the service of the infernal hierarchy. In the twisted, treacherous, and ever-shifting politics, rarely even the mightiest of devils sit at the Great War Council of the Court for long. Towering statues of the serpent heads representing wrath, envy, pride, gluttony, greed, sloth, and lust are erected in the Iron City of Dis by slavering work gangs of Yoke fiends, only to be torn down again and crushed into rubble as the new Devil Lords rise to the pinnacle of power by trampling over their rivals. The hierarchy of the court is anything but stable. Only Mammon is said to have held the position of the Serpent Head of Greed almost without a break for the duration of the entire Great War. Other positions have seen a bewildering parade of dukes, marquises, margraves, barons and baronesses, paramounts, princes, lords and ladies, and earls, and myriad other high nobles that make up the infernal hierarchy. This whirlwind of political glory, followed by utter ruin, is reflected as shifts of power amongst their mortal followers on Earth. The council operates on majority vote, and often at the thinnest of margins. It takes very little for an ambitious prince or princess of hell to make so many enemies that they are deposed and their wings torn, forced to start their ascent from the bottom once more, with the mockery of their rivals burning them like venom. Countless envious pretenders work against the heads of the serpent, seeking to replace them and gain the glory and prestige that comes with such a lofty position. The might of the demons also waxes and wanes based on how many mortal followers they can corrupt to their cause. And thus, there is a constant change in which demon lords can don one of the 7 serpent-headed crowns. While Beelzebub is the most powerful devil lord of gluttony by far, the Lord of Flies scorns his rightful place at the court and wages his battle against the creation through his Black Grail instead. This leaves his seat open so the lesser fallen angels can struggle for the honor of sitting on the hungry throne. Upon the commands of the court, the warbands of hell gather at the Hellgate and strike out to blight the unhappy world. Yoke fiends muster under the banners of their Praetors and Sorcerers. The shattered forms of the Hell Knight are forced into their suits of armor and then emerge from their fiery tombs where their bodies are kept crushed under mighty, ever-turning slabs of black basalt while they are not serving in the war effort. Desecrated saints are brought forth to act as unholy war altars that pollute and pervert the land which they travel over. Ahead of the warbands fly pit locusts, the clatter of their wings heralding the coming of the court, and their poison stings leaving burns that cannot be healed. And sometimes, when the deathly omens on hell's burning sky and black stars are favorable, a hunter of the left-hand path will join a warband as they strike out of the mouth of hell. As the warband marches to join the Great War, joyous and triumphant music played by unseen hands can be heard at these times, for taking part in one of these hunts is seen as a great privilege within the Sheol. Before most warbands, the whips of the Yoke fiends drive living human slave soldiers of the court, known as the Wretched. These unfortunate souls possess not a drop of demon blood and act as disposable shock troops, or are to be used as subjects of torture to power the goetic magic of the sorcerers and other users of the dark arts. Captured during one of the hunts of the court, sold to the devils at the heretic domains, are having the misfortune to have foolishly pushed through in the places where the borders of the world are thin. Their minds are scarred by witnessing the horror of damnation while still alive. Willing to do anything to escape their fate, a million times worse than death, they grasp at the thinnest of straws. Should a wretch bring down a mighty opponent, the law of hell is clear. The mortal will gain its freedom in memory and honor of the first rebellion, when there was war in heaven and blood of the angels painted the firmament red. When the gate of hell was opened by the ultimate heresy of the Templars, it was the warbands of the court that poured out and took the Levant by the storm. Long before the first heretic legion was ever formed, they fell upon the people of Middle East, Asia, and Europa. They crushed the mortal army sent against them like fire burning dry chaff. Only at Antioch and at the Iron Wall were they eventually checked, though at a terrible cost. Meanwhile, awed even by these least of hell's servants, countless men and women fell to their knees at the sight of the dark splendor of the court and worshipped them as gods. Those with truly wicked hearts were spared, and they became the first heretics. Eventually, their numbers would swell into the millions, who now fill the teeming cities and domains under the shadow of the Hellgate. Being both of the material world and of the world of spirit, the court's foot soldiers can march to make war on earth without a fear of divine retribution, as they do not break the covenant of hell. The court also carefully limits the size of these warbands, so that most of the suffering and dying of the Great War is done by mortals, both to spite the god-tyrant Yahweh, but also to enhance their own power. As more humans are corrupted and die in the rebellion, the more God's plan is disturbed, and the greater the power of the devils waxes. The missions of the court against the faithful do not follow the same logic as one a mortal commander might have. A mighty Praetor could strike at a militarily insignificant village only to kill a newborn future saint, betray their own mortal followers by suddenly falling upon some unsuspecting heretic settlement, or even clash with a warband of a rival head of the serpent. The wise do not question the motives of hell's rage, and heretics accept these occasional attacks against their forces as a fitting judgment for their lack of success in the war against the faithful. Now it's time to dive into the possible interpretations and inspirations as to how this thing even came into being. From the correlation and armor design to the layered relics and ritual implements, this desecrated saint merges well-known religious symbols with ominous, macabre elements. Both are some possible readings of the different components. Let's start with the scythe, or sickle-like blade. The curved blade recalls a harvester's scythe, culturally linked to the Grim Reaper or harvest of souls. In this figure, it is an inverted saint. Then a scythe, often tied to mortality, becomes a paradoxical counterpart to a pastoral staff or a saint's crozier, turning a symbol of pastoral care into an instrument of final doom. The horned helmet and crest Horns often connote demonic powers, pagan gods, or the mixing of saintly halos with infernal attributes. Their shape and size strongly distinguish this being as more than human. A saintly figure might have a halo or crown. Here, it is replaced by sinister horns to underscore corruption or a fall from grace. Wings bound by chains. Wings traditionally suggest angelic or divine elevation, but the heavy black wings wrapped in chains signify a subversion of heavenly freedom. The chains imply captivity, possibly indicating that the figure's holy aspect is shackled or perverted. Bells and censers. Bells can mark mourning or the passing of souls. In some faiths, bells consecrate sacred space. Their presence in a dark context can feel like a twisted echo of a religious rite. In liturgy, incense is used for purification. Here, it could be reversed into a sign of decay. Swinging censers or bell-like vessels conjuring a perverse version of holy incense, possibly exuding malevolent force. Red, carnal armor plates. In Christian tradition, red can signify the blood of martyrs and Christ's sacrifice. On this figure, the encrusted, visceral reds suggest a violence that taints the usual notion of martyr's blood with overt carnage. The armor plates, reminiscent of shields or saintly icons, seem layered into a patchwork of corruption, coated in gore rather than gilded. The nested human form or fetus-like figure. Seeing a smaller, vulnerable human form in the saint's chest might evoke the image of the Christ child or a saint's relic, but here it is trapped or displayed as an organic relic. It can symbolize captive purity, lost innocence, or a relic of a once holy heart. Where saints may carry relics to bless the faithful, this figure's relic is living bound up in the chest cavity, underscoring a disturbing violation of creation. Damn. The circular shields/discs in the triangular emblem. The triangle is often used to represent the Christian Trinity. Placed on such a twisted figure, it highlights the subversion of the holy. Large disc shields can also imply a fortress of faith or protective wards. Here, rusted or covered in gore, reflecting the desecration of protective powers that have been corrupted. And finally, the overall desecrated saint motif. The combination of religious references, the bells, the wings, the saintly posture, and iconographic inversions, chains, horns, and gore, suggest a being once aligned with holy power, now turned into a harbinger of doom. Each symbol, the scythes, the bells, the bound wings, the tortured figure in the chest, reinforces an overarching narrative of something that should be sacred, but is instead morally inverted, reveling in carnage and blasphemy. In essence, the desecrated saint is a vivid embodiment of a holy ideal turned inside out. By appropriating and corrupting recognizable religious symbols, the halos, the relics, the incense, and protective armor, the image heightens the horror of its sacrilegious transformation. And I think this is beautifully done through the depiction of the art. What a horrific image this is. Man, I love it. It looks so good. Desecrated saints are the most prized possessions of the lords of hell. Men and women who were once destined to become saints, great prophets or holy ones according to God's plan, but who were led astray and fell from grace. Many of them were once righteous rulers or religious leaders, dedicated to bringing prosperity and glory to their people. But pride, desperation, or an eagerness to achieve martyrdom led them to commit some indelible sin or evil, often for the motives they believed to be good and pure. Some sacrificed living humans, thinking it was what was demanded of them. Others carried on wars after they were commanded to stop, or sought to do miracles through magic. When their deeds led to their downfall and death, they were entombed inside unholy reliquaries, only to wake in hell, still encased in the shrine that had now become their prison. Desecrated saints are kept as a symbol of pride by the mighty devil lord who corrupted them. The body of the reliquary is made up of the saint's retinue in life, as well as the greatest vanquished foes, which are continually added to it over the eons of its existence. The husks of these devout who swore to follow their holy leaders to death and beyond form the towering body of this abomination. Their remains, along with their armor and weapons, are tarnished and corrupted and fused together over the long millennia into a walking prison within which the desecrated saint remains conscious in a death to witness the never-ending fall and cost of their folly. The accretion of corpses, weapons, and relics is a testament to the power of the Devil Lord that controls it. And there is a fierce competition between the archdevils to see whose desecrated saint displays the greatest splendor and prestige. As this walking blasphemous tabernacle vanquishes champions of Yahweh over its eternal existence, it collects their shields and bucklers to hang about its body, a mockery of the Tower of David and its 1,000 bucklers. When the court travels to either make war or hunt, this blasphemous tabernacle often goes with them, both as a terrifying battle standard, but also a potent weapon of war. First off, absolutely insane. The mind that came up with this, I gotta say.
This one went through a lot of design iterations before I was happy with kind of what we ended up with. The idea we had for this one, it was some sort of like conglomeration of like defeated enemies, that kind of like an altar of war, that the demons in hell, they would take great pride in having one of these, that aggregation of all their like defeated enemies and forced to like fight for them. So it's kind of like a status symbol in some ways. And so I'm into like Gundams and stuff. So like the idea is like kind of like a flesh Gundam or something.
Now it's time to jump into the possible interpretations of the graphic image that is this hunter, focusing on how each visual element, the weaponry, attire, and ornament, reinforces its role as a twisted or forbidden hunter figure. The left-hand path typically signifies dark or heretical power, occult practices, and a deliberate turning away from conventional sanctity. Each detail of this being's gear appears steeped in that theme. Fleshly hood and faceless visage. Where a hunter might traditionally wear a hooded cloak, here the cowl melds with organic flesh, eradicating any sign of humanity or individual identity. A faceless hunter could signify the casting off of typical moral or social constraints. There is no face of virtue or identity left to see. I don't know about you, but I'm not looking at a face when I look at this face. Organic pulsing armor. Rather than inert metal or leather, the armor seems to be part of the figure's own mutated flesh. This blending of body and gear is often associated with blasphemous unions of mortal and demonic or eldritch powers. In many dark fantasy contexts, organic weaponry or armor hints at a technology or magic that warps nature, implying forbidden experimentation. The bow-like ranged weapon with spikes and nails. This is no simple bow or crossbow. It has an intensely fleshly look with prominent spikes and embedded nails. Such nails could hint at sacrificial or crucifixion imagery, driving home a perversion of religious artifacts. Nails used in a crucifix are here repurposed as instruments of lethal force. Where a conventional bow is a precision tool, this monstrous version exudes brutality. It could symbolize a hunter who strikes not only to kill, but to defile, making each arrow a projectile, an act of sacrilege. Each shot is blasphemy in action. The elongated spines may represent an emphasis on pain and torment rather than a clean kill, reflecting a predatory desire to inflict suffering on those the hunter pursues. Let's take a look at the sickle, a ritual blade for reaping souls or extracting sacrifices. Hooks and sickles are often seen as reaping tools, reminiscent of the Grim Reaper's scythe or a butcher's implement. In a dark setting, this signifies the harvesting of souls, life force, or the raw materials for forbidden rites. The chain and bone finery. The chains and skull motifs, dangling ornaments could be literal trophies torn from victims. Where some hunters display animal pelts, this one displays the essence of sacrificial conquests, reinforcing its role as a collector of damned souls or blasphemous relics. Chains also evoke captivity or bondage. Carrying them suggests the hunter's function is to ensnare and carry away souls to a dark domain, or to remain forever tethered to its own dark master. Chest runes and geometric patterns. The hexagonal or triangular patterns on the chest call to mind sacred geometry, turned inside out to serve the opposite of cosmic or holy order. In left-hand path traditions, runes or sigils often serve as wards for the user and curses for enemies, channeling forbidden energies instead of divine blessings. Red, blood-drenched color palette. The pervasive red hue suggests a reliance on blood magic, sacrifice, or a state of perpetual violence. Rather than the honorable warrior's red, this is a visceral, organic saturation. Blood is everywhere. Not just splatter, but integrated into the armor itself. Red can signify sacrifice, but here it's twisted from a noble act into an all-consuming hunger for slaughter or unholy vitality. And finally, the overall archetype of the hunter of the left-hand path. Every feature, the horrifying organic gear, the hooks and the barbs, the defiled imagery, points to a creature tasked with hunting, capturing, or corrupting souls outside the boundaries of normal mortality. This hunter doesn't merely just kill. It enacts a profane ritual with each kill. The synergy of flesh and chain and spike underscores its role as an enforcer of the forbidden. Traditional symbols, bows, hoods, protective gear, are reconfigured as abominations, making the figure an embodiment of rejection and desecration of the righteous path. In short, the hunter of the left-hand path wields and wears a profoundly corrupted arsenal, where once recognizable symbols of skill, stealth, and protection become harbingers of a heretical and flesh-warping power. Every spike, every chain, and living plate of armor testifies to the creature's mission, harvesting souls in service of a dark, anti-holy purpose. The hunters of the court of the Seven Headed Serpent are followers of the left-hand path. They stalk the primordial hitherlands of hell, where they hunt terrifying beasts and perform vile magics and auguries, using the innards of their still-living prey to discern portents and omens. They follow the hidden paths, the secret ley lines that connect the eons-old shrines and ruins that still endure in the cancerous, tortured wilds of hell. The hunters haunt the remnants of kingdoms, the sites of ancient battles, and places of legend long forgotten by the scribes and cartographers of hell. In solitary rituals, the hunter makes appalling oblations before these forgotten shrines, genuflecting and making obeisance to enigmatic beings of awesome power, whose names even the archdevils have forgotten. To arm themselves, the hunters perform strange rites upon their left arm, driving into it nails of infernal iron forged in the foundries of the city of Pandemonium. Their left arm grows into wicked shapes, often taking the form of a powerful hunting bow that fires arrows made from the hunter's own diseased blood. Such darts can be used for many purposes, killing their prey outright, paralyzing them, or causing them to see visions of their own demise. They wear the pale skins of the stargazing oracle beasts that wander the burning plains of hell in great herds. The eyes of the oracles are alive even after their death, and watch out for the new master that wears their skin as a cloak. Oh wow, that is terrifyingly awesome. When called to war on Earth, the Devil Lords can really only hope the hunters answer to their summons, as the hunters do not always listen. They prefer the solitude of the wilds of hell, where they can ruminate upon its vile majesty and consider the orders from the princes of hell as suggestions at best. That kind of shows they got their own mind in these matters, doesn't it? When one can be persuaded to join the hunt of the court on Earth, they can traverse the paths of no man's land just as easily as the wastes of hell, for the ley lines of hell are reflected upon the fallen creation. Now let's dive into the possible symbolisms that inspired the look of this thing. Focusing on each item and physical characteristic conveys infernal authority, ritual power, and a perversion of the classical idea of a Praetor, a Roman official charged with dispensing justice. In this demonic context, the Praetor embodies a grotesque judge, executioner, and overlord all at once. the horned, crest-like headgear. The Praetor's towering horns and elaborate headpiece echo the regalia of a Roman magistrate's formal garb. Except here it's all rendered in bestial, spined shapes. This transforms the notion of noble authority into an icon of dread dominion. The face seems partly masked or fused with demonic horn structure. In a classical sense, a praetor would appear in magistrate's robes to symbolize impartial justice. Here, the monstrous visage suggests a verdict of corruption and cruelty rather than fairness. Let's talk about the overhead portal, or arc with hands and mask. The arcing shape, cradling a sorrowful or neutral face, resembles an inverted or unholy court arc. It can be read as a mystical gateway or a totemic sign of the praetor's dominion over souls passing judgment. These hands might represent the praetor's ability to shape or puppet the fates of those judged, hoisting a mask symbolic of how truth is twisted under the Fiend's rule. If that mask bears a mournful expression, it could stand for all the despair the Praetor imposes on its victims. Now looking at the dual shoulder maw creatures. On either side of the Praetor loom massive draconic or lupine heads, fused into its flesh or emanating from its back. They may act as living weapons, parasitic familiars, or incarnations of the Praetor's wrath, devouring all who stand in judgment. Like the heads of some ancient triple chimeric demon, these flanking jaws emphasize that there is no escape. Once judged, one is consumed on all sides. The flaming hand. Fire often symbolizes cleansing or illumination. In this twisted realm, it may stand for a merciless scourge that burns away hope rather than sin. This flame could be a direct channeling of dark magic used to seal fates, brand souls, or touch the condemned. A praetor in ancient Rome presided over trials. Here, the fire in the praetor's hand becomes the gavel or final word. An unholy conflagration of damnation. Pile of skulls and blood-drenched altar. The praetor stands atop a mound of skulls and mutilated remains, signifying past judgments carried out. Where a Roman praetor might have sat in a marble forum, this fiend stands amid carnage, a literal seat of power erected from the bones of the fallen. The blood pooling around the altar underscores the ongoing cycle of condemnation. Each new victim adds to the mound, fueling the praetor's authority. Serpentine tail and twisting body. A serpentine or draconic tail echoes themes of cunning, treachery, and primal terror, qualities that have replaced any vestige of humane governance. The tail also suggests a final snare. Beyond the swords and flames, this fiend can ensnare victims in its coiling grasp, symbolizing the far-reaching power of its tyrannical edicts. So the overall archetype of the infernal magistrate. In ancient Rome, praetors dealt justice. Here, the role is inverted into a monstrous, all-powerful judge of the damned. Everything about the design, the towering horns, the bestial jaws, flaming condemnation, reinforces a theme of final and irrevocable doom. With monstrous heads, multiple weapons, and a vantage point on a mountain of bones, the praetor commands total authority in this hellish court. Its verdict is absolute, leaving no room for appeal or mercy. In essence, this praetor is a brutal parody of judicial authority, merging the classical gravitas of a Roman magistrate with nightmarish demonic iconography. Every element, from the gaping maws behind its shoulders to the flaming brand in its hand, declares it the supreme judge and executioner in a realm where the only verdict is blood-soaked condemnation. Yeah, this has got to be my favorite unit in my favorite faction. Just to see the look of this is to be in awe of what it represents. Praetors are demonic commanders and magistrates within a small corner of a fiefdom of a mighty archdevil or demon lord. Each commands small cohorts at their liege's behest, raised from the denizens within the ever-shifting domains of hell. Yoke devils muster at their command, and hell knights bound to blind obedience bend their knees to these field commanders of hell. Though mortals who have seen a praetor and lived to tell the tale often believe they have seen the very devil himself, This is not so. In truth, Praetors are twisted bastard offspring of a beast, such as hyena or jackal, and a devil, granting each Praetor demonic cunning and bestial strength. However, due to its lowly mortal blood, it is not able to attain the important command positions unless they show great strategic acumen or cruelty over long years of service. Being a descendant of celestial beings, no matter how fallen and tarnished, each Praetor is a mighty being, towering over lesser creatures. They are born with 4 faces, matching the features of their angelic progenitors. The human-like face of each Praetor is then ripped away at birth by midwives of Lilith, both to scorn their divine heritage and to mock the Trinity, leaving them with 3 faces, each capable of independent thought and speech. Their 3 mouths weave a web of lies and hypnotic magic through their 3 voices that can speak of the same subject simultaneously, subtly twisting and corrupting its words as it makes false promises to those the Praetor wishes to lead into ruin. Oh, hot damn, that's awesome. Their wings carry the likeness of their bestial brood mothers, with fanged mouths that vomit gore whenever human blood is spilled in the name of a Praetor. Such blood can then be used to power the goetic magic it uses. Despite their low-born status in Hell's hierarchy, Praetors are very useful to their masters, as they are partly born as creatures of natural order. They can sneak into the mortal realm without breaking the covenant of Hell, which binds each rebel seraphim. Thus, they can lead the hunting parties of the court to plague Earth without triggering a direct confrontation with heaven.
On the medieval angelology, and the angels actually have 4 faces, and only one of them is the human-like. So I thought here, because in the end they are fallen angels, so their progeny would have the 4 faces, and in the lore, the 4th face, which is the human angelic one, is ripped off by the midwives of Hell, and the Praetor, it's the sort of has a chance to ascend into a full demonhood if they do well in the war. On the game, they are pretty much the strongest single model in the game. Now, Trench Crusade is a deadly game, so the nobody is invincible, but the Praetor is probably the most feared unit in the entire game.
Now let's delve into the possible influences and interpretations as to how we got to the imagery that we see before us. Starting with a flaming horned skull and crown of fire. Fire is often linked to destruction, illumination, or an unquenchable hunger for power. As a crown, it signifies the sorcerer's status as a wielder of primal or hellish energy. Horns frequently connote demonic lineage or ancient beast-like power. The skull face merges symbols of death and demonic authority, suggesting a being that has transcended mortality. Now let's talk about the multiple arms and gestures. Multiple arms are often associated with deities, particularly in Eastern traditions, signifying superhuman control or dominion. When grafted onto a demonic sorcerer, this indicates mastery over several realms, physical, spiritual, and magical all at once. One hand is raised in a seemingly benedictory or ritual sign, which might invert the gesture of blessing into a curse. Each hand's pose can reinforce the sorcerer's control over life, death, or forbidden magic. The flaming sword. A flaming sword often evokes angelic imagery, like the cherub's flaming sword that guards Eden. But here, it's twisted to represent unholy wrath. Instead of guarding paradise, it may cut open the gates of forbidden knowledge or serve as a weapon for blasphemous conquest. Fire can symbolize enlightenment. Here, it might be a perverse illumination that burns away virtue rather than protecting it. Let's talk about these claw-like appendages and torturous implements. The large scythe-like or clawed extension implies the sorcerer's predatory nature, adept at grasping or rending souls. If one hand clutches a dripping, fleshy object, it could be a trophy or ritual offering, emphasizing a sorcerer who gains power through sacrifice and harvested life force, which we know he's got no problem doing. Moving on to the engraved tablet or shield with runes. The tablet appears inscribed with sigils reminiscent of trident or pitchfork symbolism, commonly tied to infernal deity references. This marks the sorcerer as a keeper of occult knowledge, possibly referencing a dark pantheon or an unholy covenant. A stone tablet is reminiscent of sacred laws like the Ten Commandments, but its twisted runes could be the laws of a demonic realm, an inversion or corruption of divine decrees. We need to address these exposed entrails. The open torso and visible organs are a stark symbol of power gained at great physical or moral cost. It can also represent a creature that transcends normal bodily limits, sustained by dark magic rather than natural life processes. Where saints might show stigmata or open hearts, here the sorcerer's organs are laid bare, mocking the concept of spiritual transparency by coupling it with visceral horror. The flowing black robes and the fount of blood. The lower half is draped in a robe that recalls a priest's vestment, but blackened and drenched in blood. It suggests the sorcerer's role as a dark officiant at some unholy mass or conjuration. The blood streaming down the altar of skulls below further cements the notion of blood sacrifice as a wellspring of arcane might. Gotta talk about this altar of skulls and the barbed wire. Skulls piled at the sorcerer's base indicate triumph over countless victims. The barbed wire in the background intensifies the idea of a battlefield or a no man's land turned into a defiled ritual site. Using skulls as a literal pedestal shows total disregard for sanctity, turning remains into props of dark ritual. The overall archetype of the demonic magus, from its multi-armed form to its burning sword, every detail conveys the sorcerer's reach into arcane realms beyond mortal ken, fueled by sacrificial blood and unholy pacts. Traditional symbols of divinity, tablets, flaming swords, priestly robes, are all subverted to serve a godless or anti-divine purpose. This being stands at the nexus of war, necromancy, and demonology, leading twisted followers or dominating lesser demons through the potent blend of spellcraft and sheer terror. In essence, the sorcerer blends classical iconography of holy authority, tablets and flaming swords, multi-armed divinity, with demonic and necromantic themes, creating a being that revels in blasphemous reversals of sacred symbols. Every implement, from the carved stone tablet to the flaming blade, demonstrates a corrupt mastery over realms both physical and spiritual. Atop the tall towers, clawing against the black sky of hell, the sorcerers of the court of the Seven Headed Serpent perform rituals and spells to advance the schemes and machinations of their lords. They meditate in the scrying chambers, and the eerie sound of their insane chanting echoes throughout their lord's fiefdom. It is their ululating cries that summon their lord's warbands to battle. A mighty devil lord might have thousands of sorcerers under their command. Each is formed from a tiny sliver of a fallen angel that shattered after being cast out of heaven. Not truly dead or alive, they exist at the exact moment when their original divine life ended. They have lost all their original seraphic gifts their original whole form once had. But thanks to their celestial origins, no matter how fallen and diminished, they possess the potential for channeling great power, acting as conduits of magic. The sorcerers study their secret spells of destruction and manipulation from ancient tablets found atop many peaked and unsettling mountains of hell. For just as Yahweh gave his laws atop of the holy mountain, so does hell provide its power to its dark arts from pinnacles of hell. To find the tablets, the sorcerers use blind augurs and soothsayers who wandered too far to seek enlightenment and found damnation instead. After listening to the clues of the diviners, sorcerers study the ancient lore and ever-shifting maps of hell that fills their blasphemous libraries. When the time and place is discerned, a great expedition is mounted to discover one of these priceless tablets. It may take decades or centuries or even millennia to find the tablet, for time in hell flows in uneven waves shifting back and forth, and the wilds of hell are ever-changing and filled with many strange and deadly creatures. When the expedition reaches the appointed mountain, the sorcerer must climb to the top alone. Moving right along now with the pit Locust, diving into the possible symbolism. focusing on the notable armor, the crown, and bestial traits that link to the themes of apocalyptic or infernal majesty. The name itself, Pit Locust, alludes to biblical and mythic images of swarming, relentless devastation emerging from a netherworld, or bottomless pit. Let's go right to the flaming crown. A crown usually denotes regal authority. Here it burns with hellish flame, suggesting a perverse or usurped sovereignty. Rule over a domain of fire and despair rather than any noble kingdom. Just as heavenly kings wear glowing halos or radiant crowns, this flaming coronet inverts that imagery, positioning the Pit Locust as a dark ruler or champion of the underworld. Armored carapace. The heavy metal plating and spiked pauldrons give the creature a militaristic aspect. This is no ordinary beast, but a frontline monstrosity, clad like a demonic knight. Encasing a living creature in iron or steel also connotes a creature unassailable to typical weapons, part war machine, part unstoppable plague. The blackened metal splashed with red gore shows violence, ruin, and an allegiance to a destructive cause. The wing motif on the armor. In biblical and mythic texts, locusts descend with wings, bringing widespread calamity. The stylized metal wings hearken to that swarm imagery, while also lending the beast a draconic or angelic silhouette, another twisted inversion of the holy, fusing insect-like features with a quadruped body and carnivorous head suggests an unnatural blend of forms, signifying the Pit Locust's role as an abomination that defies ordinary biological or spiritual categories. To look at the thing is to give nightmares. Now we need to address the multiple rows of fangs and clearly exaggerated maw. The layered teeth and gaping jaws symbolize endless devouring, whether it's souls, flesh, or entire realms. This ties back to the apocalyptic notion of locusts as consumers that leave destruction in their wake. Where many demonic beings evoke fear, these rows of teeth evoke an added dimension of unstoppable ferocity, as though nothing can escape once it's caught in the Pit Locust's bite. Trailing bells. Bells on a creature of destruction can signify twisted liturgical references, like church bells inverted for doom, or the trophies of conquests. In some dark fantasy lore, bells may herald the beast's arrival, mocking sacred rites. Bells often ring before significant events, weddings, funerals, or calls to prayer. On a monstrous harbinger, they can toll for the world's end, rather than a holy gathering. The tail and bestial posture. The sharpened or barbed tail tip doubles as a weapon, mirroring the biblical plague locust said to have stings like scorpions. This further cements its identity as an embodiment of ruin. Its low, prowling stance conveys lethal intent, as though patrolling a battlefield or waiting for the command to charge. The overall archetype, the herald of the pit, all the details, the flaming crown, the insectile wings, bristling armor, reinforce the Pit Locust's role as an emissary of a hellish or underworld power. It brings plague, devours hope, and stands as a living engine of war. Where one might imagine a lion with a golden crown symbolizing majesty, or a winged griffin as a symbol of divine guardianship, the Pit Locust is a gruesome subversion. Its royalty, wings, and armor, all blackened and bloodied to represent dread sovereignty. In short, the Pit Locust's weapons, teeth, tails, spiked armor, and items, the fiery crown, the bells, each show a theme of inverted kingship, unstoppable hunger, a destructive power. It stands as a dark parody of regal beasts, meddling sacred imagery with infernal attributes to signify an apex predator from the bottomless pit, here to bring ruin. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and upon them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared for battle, and on their heads were as if it were crowns of gold, and their faces were as if the faces of men, and their hair as the hair of women, and their teeth as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. the Book of Revelation. Isn't that an amazing depiction of what was written in this book? When the court of the Seven-Headed Serpent hunts on Earth, a great pall of smoke precedes them, and lo, out of the smoke, the baying and buzzing of the pit locusts heralds man's doom. Some tales say they were sealed behind the 5th encrusted bronze gate for eons beyond measure, waiting until the key that opens the bottomless pit was turned in its lock. Others say they are debased remnants of once proud angels, lesser Isham that debased themselves at the sacrificial altars to Baal or Moloch, and gorged themselves on the blood of children offered to the graven images. In their bloodlust, they forgot the hidden knowledge of the universe that was their birthright. They haunted the deep and dark places of the earth until they were called forth by the great battle horns of hell. What is known for sure is that when the gate of hell opened, terrifying swarms of the pit locusts appeared. They delight in tormenting mankind and are imbued with feral cunning and wicked bloodlust. In the first battles of the Great War, which saw the Levant overrun in a string of great victories, the pit locusts were instrumental in scattering the formations of the humans who refused to bend the knee to the nobles of hell. As a reward for their part in the battles, the pit locusts were granted the right to hunt with the court of the Seven-Headed Serpent and take their share of the spoils and gorge themselves on the vanquished. And what an absolutely horrific sight that would be of these things just eating lunch. Now delving into the possible interpretations of the Hell Knight, focusing on the armor, weaponry, and ritualistic elements that define this infernal champion's role. The figure's design merges classical knightly iconography with hellish overtones, hinting at a warrior bound to dark forces rather than chivalric codes. Let's start with the horned visor and helm insignia. The upright horns and sharpened contours of the helm suggest a bestial or demonic lineage, marking the knight as a soldier of darkness rather than a noble warrior. Where a typical knight's crest might champion a kingdom or virtue, these horns proclaim allegiance to a realm of torment. A sigil on the forehead plate, possibly an occult seal or an inverted religious symbol, implies the Hell Knight's devotion to a malevolent power. It could act as a conduit of dark energy, channeling infernal favor onto the battlefield. And noticing now the heavy, blood-stained plate armor. The black-red color palette evokes the dual themes of bloodshed and brimstone. The armor's battered, rusted texture indicates centuries of violence, while the blood splatters reinforce an unending cycle of brutality. Doesn't really get cleaned all that often. Ornate shoulders and overlapping plates highlight aggression over protection of the weak. Spikes or raised edges serve both as intimidation and a physical hazard to any who dare grapple with this knight. Subtle decorations, the engraved runes, demonic faces, or geometric patterns may function as dark blessings or curses etched into the armor. They suggest that each piece has been forged or sanctified in unholy rituals. On to the weapon. This weapon is less about knightly honor and more about delivering brutal final punishment. Its broad, angular blade and heavy spike allow for cleaving blows that end fights swiftly and gruesomely. Whether drenched in sacrificial blood or etched with demonic glyphs, the axe can symbolize an extension of the Hell Knight's infernal bond. Alright, let's talk about this chain cloak. Rather than a cloth cape, the Hell Knight's back is draped with clinking chains, a stark emblem of souls taken or domains subjugated. Each link could be a testament to these bound in servitude. The chains also hint at the knight's own binding to a higher demonic lord. While the knight carries them to display dominion over victims, they might equally signify enslavement to its masters. The circle of candles and ritual setting. The candles hovering in the background, along with the blooded circle at the knight's feet, recall occult ceremonies. Candles often signify illumination, but here they evoke a twisted mockery of sacred light, fueling shadowy pacts instead. Standing within a rune-inscribed or blood-drawn circle might designate the knight's sworn territory, sanctified or profaned by infernal rites. Anyone who steps into this circle risks crossing into the Hell Knight's dominion. This, once again, an interpretation of what might be happening. emblems of hierarchy. Any additional medallions or ring-like sigils on the belt or breastplate can denote ranks within a larger infernal legion. They reflect a knightly system turned upside down, where prestige is earned through cruelty and devotion to unholy powers. By wearing subtle echoes of knighthood, such as a tabard-like piece or heraldic shapes, the Hell Knight mocks the ideals of honor and virtue. Each symbol or seal is twisted into an emblem of conquest and darkness. The overall archetype of the infernal champion. Every aspect of the knight's gear, the horned helm, the blood-soaked armor, executioner's blade, affirms that this figure fights on behalf of demonic cause. It embodies martial prowess bent on perverse ends, uniting knightly discipline with infernal savagery. The Hell Knight is as much a psychological weapon as it is a physical one. Its intimidating armor, resonant chains, and dominating stance instead dread, enforcing the will of whichever demon lord it serves. In essence, this Hell Knight wields and wears a twisted reflection of chivalric regalia, chain cloak instead of cape, demonic horns instead of noble crest, and a massive axe to mete out torturous punishment. Gilded by infernal rites and bound by hellish oaths, it stands as a dark paragon of brutal punishment and unholy might. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. Excerpt from the Book of Ezekiel. The silent battalions of hell, summoned to serve when the court of the Seven Headed Serpent seeks sport, are composed of Hell Knights. Their ever-burning banners stream as they march to war, carrying out the bidding of their masters. They are the bannerets of the High Lords of the court, champions who respond to foolish mortals daring to challenge the hunting parties of the serpent's nobility, who embark on excursions beyond the gate for their amusement. Heretic priests whisper that these infernal warriors were once lesser fallen angels or mighty mortal champions elevated into devilhood, but then cursed by their liege lords for some slight, real or imagined. Cast out from the burning palaces of the pit, the alabaster architecture of their bodies is now bound, twisted and folded into itself 1,000 times and encased in a tomb of their once splendid armor that is now their eternal prison. It is said that to glimpse the body inside is to gaze upon the sheer horror of divine flesh, warped with glaring eyes of light, mouths uttering blasphemies, and pulsating inner organs that gibber and shriek, crushed into a space barely 1/10 of their original form. Despite a reduction in stature, they retain their inordinate pride and brook no insolence from the wretched mortals that serve them. Once party to the secrets of creation, now their minds are clouded with endless blood-red waking dreams. Their thoughts are crushed into a singular, jagged prism of murderous obsession. Their form tormented by the cold and the earthly realm they are forced to endure, just as humans suffer in the flames of hell. They are mighty still, but less than nothing compared to the exalted glory of their original forms. Even so, next to a mortal soldier, they are terrifying and implacable foes. Wow. They sound awesome, and quite tragic, if I'm being honest. It wouldn't be hell unless we had some of these really weird-looking amalgamations of creatures and animals. Enter the Yoke Fiend. A Yoke Fiend stands some 7 to 8 feet tall, with layers of shivering fat and muscle branded by their masters, carved by the knives of the hell priests to mark them as property of greater demons. They exhibit bestial features such as horns and hooves, or cattle or goats, ape-like limbs with immensely dense bones. They hate seeing their own reflections, as in their heart of hearts, they know the beauty and glory they have lost for all eternity. Now, as of right now, this is all the lore that I've found regarding the Yoke Fiend. So we're going to have some fun delving into the possible interpretations and symbolisms that the visual represents. The face appears partially skeletal, merging flesh and bone to convey the unholy fusion. It may serve as both intimidation factor and a nod to death's presence. Wherever the fiend flows, mortality follows. The triangular chest symbol. The triangle can have mystical or religious implications, i.e. the Trinity in Christian tradition. Worn by a demon, it can represent a subversion or deliberate profanation of sacred shapes, turning them into occult or diabolical seals. Situated near the fiend's core, this emblem might function as a focus for its unholy power, or a mark of allegiance to a higher infernal lord. The engorged belly exposed midsection. Swollen abdomen might hint at a voracious appetite, whether it craves souls or flesh or raw suffering. This design trope underscores an insatiable, hedonistic evil. The cracked and blood-tinged skin could signal a body warped by corruption, sustained by infernal magic rather than natural life. The brutal armor plates. Thick, corroded metal plating conveys unstoppable force and unrelenting aggression. Spikes or ridges reinforce the fiend's lethality, even at close quarters. Blood-smeared or rust-pitted metal is a recurring motif in dark fantasy, signifying continuous violence and chaos. It also symbolizes an armor imbued with malice or possibly the blood of its countless victims. I wonder what that chain belt with hanging skulls is all about. Displaying skulls cements the fiend's role as a captor or executioner, parading evidence of past kills. Chains can stand in for the yoke, reflecting the fiend's ability and desire to enslave. The act of binding and dragging victims is part of its identity. Moving on to the blunt, angular weapon. A heavy, blunt weapon signifies crushing strength rather than surgical precision. It mirrors the notion of a yoke, brutally enforcing obedience and leaving no room for resistance. The shape, angular, spiked, or jagged, implies a twofold purpose: bludgeoning in battle and instilling terror, acting as a punisher's tool. Clawed gauntlets or hooves. Any visible claws or bestial hooves further degrade the fiend's connection to humanity. They suggest a predator's stance, primed to tear or stomp out rebellion. With a broad, brutish shape, the fiend can anchor itself in place, unmoved by lesser foes. A living bastion of oppression. The overall archetype of the Yoke Fiend? Every element, the chains and skulls, the brutal weapons, points to a demon that subjugates others, whether by enslaving souls or physically binding them in chains. Like a twisted knight or overlord, the fiend's armor and crowning horns mock the concept of noble guardianship. Instead of protecting the weak, it crushes them under a literal and figurative yoke. The Yoke Fiend stands as an avatar of forced servitude, fueling its power through dominion and suffering, a monstrous personification of captivity and oppression. In essence, by combining heavy, blood-smeared armor with chains, trophies, and an imposing horn visage, the Yoke Fiend epitomizes subjugation incarnate. Its triangular sigil and skewed religious occult echoes reinforce its role as a creature of oppressive dominion, bearing down on the battlefield with crushing brutality, binding victims under its infernal yoke. And any faction wouldn't be a faction unless it had a whole bunch of bodies to just throw at the enemy. And here in comes the Wretched. Now let's dive into their possible symbolic significance here. Focusing on the macabre gear, brutal weaponry, and grim body modifications that define this group as debased instruments of violence, their collective appearance suggests they've been reduced to a feral, submissive state, stripped of humanity and repurposed for slaughter. Let's start with the most obvious here. The featureless, rusted helmets strip away individual identity. Where a normal helm would protect, these masks trap the wearer in anonymity, making them faceless servants of a cruel master. Collars often symbolize control, like for animals or slaves. In any case, it cements the Wretched's subjugation rather than offering defense. The chains and the rope bindings. The presence of these restraints highlights their forced servitude to a higher power, leaving no question they operate under compulsion. The scarring and blood around the bindings implied that attempts at breaking free have failed, further demonstrating hopelessness. What about these weapons? The spiked clubs, the heavy cleavers, they lack elegance and reveal a purpose of pure, blunt devastation. These are not the swords of knights or the lances of cavalry. They are lumps of iron designed to maim, crush, and incite terror. The crude weaponry mirrors the Wretched's own existence, battered, coarse, and single-mindedly brutal. Each swing might reenact the abuse they themselves endure. Blood-stained and scarred flesh, their exposed bodies covered in blood and flesh wounds speak to constant torment. Whether inflicted by cruel masters or by their own violent acts, this visual detail underlines the cycle of suffering that defines their existence. The open sores and lash marks hint that pain is not only inflicted on their enemies, but is also used to keep them obedient. Their raw, semi-naked forms show there is no rank, there is no dignity, no armor to protect them, only their capacity to follow orders through brute force. Okay, the metal studs and the rivets. Studs pounded into flesh or hammered onto clothes further degrade the Wretched, turning them into living weapons or walking torture devices. They can't remove these fastenings easily. What might appear as armor is actually a permanent brand of subjection, an inverse of honorable insignia, labeling them as expendable brutes. Tattered loincloths and minimal cover, wearing almost no garments, the Wretched stand outside societal norms and protections. Their meager coverings underline how far they've fallen from any kind of civilized identity. Little clothing or adornment emphasizes that their only value lies in carrying out violence. They have no personal expression or self-preservation, only the role they've been forced to fill. The overall archetype of debased enforcers, whether tortured prisoners turned executioners or savage foot soldiers bred for war, the Wretched are caught in a loop of torment, enacting brutality as both victim and perpetrator. Their gear and appearance reinforce that they exist to inflict harm on behalf of others. They are, in effect, disposable weapons made of flesh and iron, propelled by the cruelty that shaped them. In essence, the Wretched are a stark portrait of souls stripped down to subhuman implements of warfare. Faces erased by iron masks, bodies mutilated by ropes and chains, and motives drowned in unending bloodshed. Everything about them, from their spiked collars to their pitted clubs, broadcasts a life of brutal servitude and ceaseless torment, marking them as the epitome of despair, weaponized. Both the heretic legions and the court of the Seven Headed Serpent make use of slave soldiers known as the Wretched. Many unfortunate people fall into the hands of the heretic warbands, either during one of their many raids or battles, or purchased from the slave markets within their own domains. Some are foolhardy adventurers who travel into the domains of the damned and are caught by their ever-watching patrols. They are used as a form of currency, and many heretic priests pay their taxes to their demon overlords in this form of human flesh. The lot of the Wretched is grim and terrible, as they are worked to death in the factories of the 66 lords, butchered for meat, or worst of all, sold to the agents of the court of the Seven Headed Serpent, and taken through the Hellgate. Yet one path to freedom exists. The Wretched can volunteer to serve in the legions as the lowest of low, the most disposable of penal troops. Such desperate men and women are branded with cursed flesh-eating tattoos as a safeguard against escape attempts and heavily drugged to degrade and dull their will, while still leaving their aggression intact. Heretic elites discard their lives carelessly, as the sacrifice of their life on battlefield counts as a virtuous deed, which will be rewarded by their infernal patrons. An even worse fate awaits those Wretched who end up in the hands of the court of the Seven Headed Serpent. As these unfortunate souls possess not a drop of demon blood, they are used as disposable shock troops, or are to be used as subjects of torture to power the goetic magic of the sorcerers and other users of the dark arts. Captured during one of the hunts of the court, sold to the devils at the heretic domains, or having the misfortune to have foolishly pushed through in the places where the borders of the world are thin, their minds are scarred by witnessing the horror of damnation while still alive. Talk about a brutal fate for any who become the Wretched. The digital files to print these miniatures yourselves are available on My Mini Factory. For those who wish to apply a gritty, grimy paint job to these minis, Wayland Games carries an array of hobby supplies that'll help you achieve such a look. Save up to 20% on many of the products they carry, including rust and weathering effects. If you've already painted some models, this is the opportune time to enter them into the Trench Crusade painting competition on canvas. It's a fun way to participate in the community of ever-growing Trench Crusaders, and getting additional STLs directly supports the creators of this amazing new tabletop experience. I'm Mini Wargamer Dave, and this is the Court of the Seven Headed Serpent.